The New York Mets have added another pitcher to bolster their staff, Clay Holmes, on a 3-year deal. The question is, can he really transition from all-star reliever into a starting pitcher? We'll break it all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Clay Holmes is a New York Met, signs a 3-year, $38 million deal to change boroughs in New York. The most interesting part of this contract, for one, it includes an opt-out for the second year, but really the most interesting thing here is the fact that Clay Holmes is reportedly going to be a starting pitcher for the New York Mets, or at least that's going to be the plan going into spring training. Now, we're going to talk all about that transition in the next segment, but first things first, I just want to talk about what Clay Holmes has been for the Yankees over the last 4 years, because if nothing else, if the starting pitching doesn't work out, the Mets are getting a great relief pitcher on this contract. Since getting traded from the Pirates to the Yankees in 2021, Clay Holmes has pitched to a 2.69 ERA across 4 seasons and 217 and 2/3 innings pitched. He has saved 74 games, 30 of them coming this past year, where he was an all-star for the second time. With that said, he did lose his closing job down the stretch, as Luke Weaver was pitching great at that point at the end of the season, and Holmes was struggling a little bit, particularly in September. So those guys flip roles. Holmes actually pitched better once he got back into a setup role, and in the playoffs, he was still very effective. In the ALDS, he did not allow a single run across 5 innings pitched against the Royals. Then, when they squared off against the Guardians, he faced a little bit of struggles, gave up 3 runs, 2 of them coming on a walk-off home run in Game 3 of the ALCS, where Jhonkensy Noel hit a walk-off homer. But after that, buckled down in the World Series, got 5 appearances, did not allow a run, only allowed 1 hit and 2 walks across 4 1/3 innings pitched. So if his stuff was playing against the Dodgers, he's got some good stuff for sure. Now, regardless, again, of what you're getting when it comes to that transition potential to be a starting pitcher, since 2021, Clay Holmes is 10th among all relievers in innings pitched. There's been a little over 50 guys who have pitched 200 innings out of bullpens since 2021. Among those guys, Clay Holmes is tied with A.J. Minter for the 11th best ERA at 3.05, and that's including a stint in 2021, the first half of the year with the Pirates, where he pitched to an ERA near 5 before he got unlocked with the Yankees. Again, with the Yankees since 2021, he had a 2.69 ERA. If you look at that ERA, which again was over 200 innings pitched, and you put that up against all these guys since 2021 who have thrown at least 200 innings, he would be just outside the top 5 when it comes to reliever ERA. You have Emmanuel Clase, Jason Adam, Raisel Iglesias, Ryan Helsley, surprisingly Alex Vesia, and then you'd have Clay Holmes. So if you're looking at relievers who have been consistent workhorses out of bullpens and very effective, he has been one of the absolute best. So you look at the contract, 3 years, $38 million. He's going to turn 32 in March. These are still prime years for a pitcher nowadays. Guys really don't fall off until they get past 35, it seems like. So I think you're looking at 3 really good years of his career, age 32, 33, 34. He has shown no signs of real regression. And you are talking about a pitcher on this contract at $38 million over 3 years, so a little over $12 million per season, where he would be absolutely worth that if he was just a reliever. If that's all he ends up being, if he is the 8th inning guy to Edwin Diaz, that alone would have been a good signing. What could make this a potentially great signing is if he can pull off this switch and he can actually become a starting pitcher. And this is a new inefficiency that front offices are going to try to manipulate, finding these starting pitchers who who have a profile they believe could transition into being a starter, and then you see if they can actually give you more innings of volume because they are one of your best pitchers. Seth Lugo did it, obviously. That one still hurts, right? Leaves the Mets, goes to the Padres, ends up being really good, and then this past year was an ace. I mean, it was unbelievable with the Royals. Ronaldo Lopez signs with the Braves, similar contract. I think his was 3 years, $30 million. And it was, oh, wait a minute, he's going to be a starter? What's this? And then it worked out. He was an all-star for the Braves. Jordan Hicks did it to varying degrees of success this past year. Garrett Crochet, a little bit of a different mold just because it's such crazy high-octane stuff. And he pitched at such an elite level to start the season. But it was another example of a reliever figuring it out as a starting pitcher. So we're going to see more and more of these guys pop up. Jeff Hoffman of the Phillies is another one where they're sort of talking about this idea that he might transition to be a starting pitcher. And the Mets are a team that I think, as we'll talk about even more in the final segment, is Frankie Montas met with the media today. The Mets are starting to get a reputation with their new pitching lab and David Stearns at the helm that they are a place that pitchers can go and they can find stuff. So Clay Holmes is going to try to find a starter's arsenal with the New York Mets. Will that work out? I want to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off site-wide during their cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with the promo code MLB. With 5 generations of experience, Omaha Steaks consistently delivers the world's best steak experience, and their gifting experts have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide during the cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get, again, that extra $30 off with the promo code MLB and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com. Extra $30 off with the promo code MLB. Minimum purchase may apply. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk about Clay Holmes making this transition into being a starting pitcher. What does he have going for him that made teams believe that he can be a starter? Well, I think the first thing, really good ground ball pitcher. This past season, his ground ball rate was 64.6%. That was in the 100th percentile. So you can't get any better than that when it comes to getting the ball on the ground. He has a sinker that averages at 96.6 miles per hour. I imagine, as we talked about the other day, that sinker average velocity is probably going to tail off just a little bit because he's not just coming out of the pen, giving it all he's got for an inning or two. So you think you're going to have to conserve some, but the movement on that pitch should stay the same regardless of the velocity, where he should still be able to get the ball on the ground with his sinker. And he has 2 elite breaking pitches. He's got a slider that had a batting average against of 133 this past season and a sweeper that had a batting average against of 172. Each of them carried a whiff rate over 38%. The other thing that I think teams really like, keeps the ball in the yard. Home run per 9 rate for his career of 0.5. 0.5. Less than a home run per 9. 1 home run every 18 innings out of the bullpen primarily. But now as a starting pitcher, I would think that home run per 9 rate might climb a little bit. But even if it climbs to 1 home run per 9, that's a really good pitcher. And I think the vision here is you put a good infield defense behind him. Maybe when Clay Holmes is on the mound, you see Luis Angel Acuna at second base to pair with Francisco Lindor, and you really have that premium infield defense up the middle to field all those ground balls. This is a pitcher who, once stretched out, could be able to pitch deep into games and has 3+ pitches to start off his arsenal. Now, he has to round things out a little bit if he's going to face a lineup 3 times through. he's got to be able to work more than two planes. Right now, you're looking at everything either on a righty, low and in. Well, same thing, righty or lefty, regardless. You're looking at low and away, low and in. That's it. Okay, the sinker on a righty is obviously breaking into their bat. The slider and the sweeper breaking away from them. And you inverse that when you have a lefty up there. Now, there's been some talk I've seen, he's got to develop a pitch for lefties. I was pretty interested to find out looking at the splits. The OPS against him this past year, left or right, identical, exactly 662. So I don't know if it's necessarily so much about lefties, although typically, yes, you want to develop a changeup so you have another offering that you can throw to lefties. I do get that, but I think it's more about getting a third plane pitch. And I think part of that is being able to work north and south, and ideally getting a four seam that he can work up in the zone is going to be just as valuable, if not more valuable even, than that changeup. Because he's going to throw that four seam, I think, more than he'll throw a changeup. The changeup is a pitch that he's maybe going to throw 5% of the time. If it's really good, 10% of the time. A change of pace pitch, something else to put in the back of the hitter's mind that they got to think about it. But for the most part, he's still going to be relying on that slider and the sweeper. You might even see an uptick in usage of those pitches, pitching backwards a little bit more with those breaking pitches. And obviously has that sinker that's still going to be his bread and butter. But being able to throw a fastball up in the zone when he gets into a two-strike count, where the batter is sitting on the slider or the sweeper, they're expecting that to be the out pitch. Maybe they're even kind of thinking in the back of their mind, maybe there's going to be a changeup here, and you can dot 97 up in the zone or 96 up in the zone. Really, it's location more than velocity, but getting a four-seam fastball that he can work up in the zone, potentially developing a changeup or a split that he can work off of that fastball, so he's not just working east to west, he can work north to south a little bit as well. And if he can really tap into those two pitches, the Mets can help him figure that out. Then all of a sudden, I don't think you're just talking about a guy that can go from elite reliever to a viable starting pitcher. I think there's a world where Clay Holmes can be a really good starting pitcher. Do I think he's the Mets ace? No. But could we see Ronaldo Lopez 2.0 here? He's got all the stuff to make that work. I mean, if you just look at what Lopez was as a reliever compared to Clay Holmes, a much better relief pitcher. So this is going to be a very interesting experiment. And I think it taps back into this idea of what David Stearns wants to bet on in free agency. He likes this contract because, look, worst case scenario, as we said, you got an eighth inning guy at a little over $12 million per for a couple of years. That's not too bad. But if it actually works as a starting pitcher, how much surplus value are you getting? The starting pitching market that Frankie Montas showed us is for a guy that can give you 150 innings, even at a higher ERA. He's going to get $17 million. Well, you got a guy coming in $4+ million less than that who has this upside. And I think there was a really compelling case made by Clay Holmes and his agency where they were sort of pitching him to teams where they really showed that he has the type of arsenal that can work as a starting pitcher, and the Mets bought their pitch, and they are in on this. And I think the Mets were able to probably sell Holmes as well on the idea that they were the right team to make that work. And if you're Clay Holmes, I'm sure there's part of him that might be slightly intimidated by this switch. If you find something that works at the big league level, you figure it out, it's hard to stray from that, right? This guy has been an all-star multiple times as a relief pitcher. So to get away from that, I'm sure it was not a decision that he took lightly. But if you're thinking about your career earnings, right? You got an opt after the second year. If this works, well, for one, the Mets have 2 years of this potentially working in their rotation at a discount. But then Clay Holmes can hit the market after his age 33 season as a starting pitcher, and starting pitchers, even at that age, like Yusei Kikuchi, are getting $20+ million. Unless you're Edwin Diaz or Josh Hader, you're not getting $20 million to be a reliever. So now all of a sudden, if this works for Clay Holmes and he hits the market after 2 years, he could sign a 3-year deal worth $60 million, which would take him 5 years to get to as a relief pitcher. So that's the upside for him to push for this. For the Mets, again, you're looking at surplus value. Now that you have Holmes signed, instead of getting two projects or two, well, this is a project. Instead of getting two of these pitchers in the Frankie Montas bucket of 17, and Severino was 22, so anything between 17 and $21 million. Well, now maybe you have a little extra in the coffer to go after Corbin Burns if you don't land Juan Soto, or to land Sean Manaea at an inflated price. There's obviously some risk that it doesn't work out, and if you're counting on this as one of your starting pitching additions, you could be left a little bit short if it just doesn't work in spring training, and he is a relief pitcher come opening day. But if that's the case, you still have some of your depth, guys like McGill, Blackburn, Budo, that could win the starting job, and Holmes just becomes a great reliever for you. So I think this is pretty much a win-win for the New York Mets. I think either one way or the other, he's going to be an effective pitcher for them next year. Best case scenario, he actually becomes a really good starting pitcher, and you got a steal of a deal, one of the steals of the offseason, similar to what Ronaldo Lopez was for the Braves last year. If the starting doesn't work out, he's getting paid pretty much market value to be a setup man, and the Mets still need arms like that. So I love this signing. I am curious what this means for their next pursuit in free agency when it comes to the pitching front. Who are they going to go after next? I want to talk about that a little bit, and also we'll discuss briefly Frankie Montas being introduced as a Met. He had a media session he had a Zoom session with the media today, so we'll talk about that to close out the show. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks on the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so what's the Mets starting rotation right now? Kodai Senga's your ace. I'm going to leave number 2 starter blank. Frankie Montas is your 3. David Peterson's your 4. Clay Holmes is your 5. You got Blackburn, McGill, and Budo as your depth. It's not a bad place to be, but you have to add another starting pitcher at least, because even if you're going to go to a 6-man rotation, which I think the Mets probably will employ at some parts of the season, I don't know if it'll be a straight 6-man all the way through, because you have days off and ways you can sort of manipulate things a little bit, where you might not always need that 6-man rotation. But hey, maybe you have a guy like Blackburn, McGill, or Budo that's in a swingman role. Maybe Clay Holmes has that in some capacity. Regardless, the Mets need to add one more starter so that Clay Holmes is their 5 at least. And all those other guys, Blackburn, McGill, Budo, they're pushed back to depth. And I wouldn't even be mad if they signed 2 more starting pitchers and had 6 viable starters, not including Blackburn, McGill, and Budo. And it's just a big competition. You see what happens. And if Holmes ends up in the bullpen, you might have 5 stars that you begin the year with, or one of the other guys might crack that rotation. We'll see. But the Mets have to sign at least one more starting pitcher, and ideally they get a frontline guy. I feel like they've just taken their 2 shots on reclamation projects, or not even reclamation projects. Montas is a reclamation project. Holmes is like a whole new project. But I really believe they have to get a frontline guy, and I feel like this is all sort of set the stage for Sean Manaea to return. Maybe this is a Juan Soto massive package deal where we see it all sort of fall in line where Soto drops to the Mets, then Pete Alonso, Sean Manaea, all the Boris clients come aboard, and that's your New York Mets for 2025. Because if they actually pulled that off, all they would really have to do is build out a bullpen and maybe get a piece or two to round out their position player group, and they're good. I mean, they're set. As it relates to Sean Manaea, it was very interesting to see Frankie Montas talk today because he clearly has a lot of affinity for Manaea. Described him as one of the closest people that he's friends with in baseball. He was a mentor to him in Oakland. And really, he talked about Luis Severino and Sean Manaea when he was a Red and they crossed paths. Even back then, the two of them were sort of raving about being with the Mets, about all the resources that they had at their disposal and how the Mets were helping them get ready and be at their best. And a big thing that he talked about that was interesting, he was asked about what was the difference in Milwaukee from Cincinnati. And he said the biggest adjustment he made was just trusting his arm, which makes a ton of sense because you have a guy that was at the top of the sport in a lot of respects. 6th in Cy Young voting in 2021, one of the better starting pitchers in baseball. He was the A's ace for a short period of time there, 2021, 2022. To having a shoulder injury, which has you pitch poorly and then end up on the shelf, and then you got to come back from that. And a lot of guys have not just the physical hurdles, but the mental hurdles. And he talked about that. He said the mental game was the biggest shift. And he said, yeah, my arm angle was higher, but that's just because I wasn't afraid to throw anymore. And he was trusting his stuff, just going out there, throwing the baseball confidently. And that led to the spike in velo, the spike in strikeouts, all of it. And he mentioned the Mets as an organization that can help him with the mental side of things because that's what they did for Severino and Manaea. He talked about how they also helped them with recovery and just being available and on the field and at their best and preparing them for every single start. And he just can't wait to get into the building and start working with this group because he believes they're going to bring out the best version of himself. To see a starting pitcher talk like that, and we'll see what Clay Holmes says about it when he gets his first media session, but it really does speak volumes to what the Mets are trying to build here. And if Walker Buehler signs with the Mets as well, and they're really just leaning into this, and this is sort of the perception of the Mets in the industry, that's a great thing. Because for one, you are going to get a lot of guys who have a ton of upside that are going to really trust that the Mets are the place that they should go to tap into it. And they might take less money to pitch for the Mets to be able to resurrect their career, get themselves back on track, transition from a reliever to a starter. That's a really good thing for this Mets franchise moving forward to have that reputation already built up. So I really loved hearing that. He also talked about just how competitive the Mets were last year as a tough lineup to face, how all in they were, and how excited he is to be part of a team that wants to win. He also mentioned wanted to throw every 5 days, which was just an interesting note because one of the reporters was sort of asking him, because his stats were better on extra rest, if he wanted to pitch on extra rest, and Montas was like, no, I want to get as many innings as I can. And I like hearing that, right? You want pitchers to want to have that workload. But overall, I think where the Mets are at right now, they have made two calculated gambles in this free agent market on Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes. Now, you're not going to hit on every single one of these. They did last year. There's every chance that Frankie Montas doesn't figure it out, or Clay Holmes is back in the bullpen by May. But there's a chance that it does work out. And I think there's a lot of upside in both of these guys because at the end of the day, they have great stuff. And that's what you bet on. You bet on great stuff. And you figure the other stuff out. You figure out how to keep a guy healthy, keep him on the mound. You figure out how to round out their arsenal so that they had the other pitches, so that their best pitches can flourish. And that strikeout pitch, it's not being sit on all the time because there is that change up or that split if you're Clay Holmes, because Frankie Montas has developed a better slider, a better breaking pitch to pair with his really good fastball and his elite split finger. These are the market inefficiencies that the Mets are going to try to exploit now. And you got to trust them in that, because maybe by taking these calculated gambles, they have $750 million to spend on Juan Soto and an additional $150 for Pete Alonso. Maybe that's where they're going to spend their long-term money, locking up their position player core, because they trust their ability to figure out the pitching side of things year in and year out. And yeah, you could say they should, instead of signing Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes, taking that money when it comes to an average annual basis, which combines 17 with 12 and a half-ish, and you're talking about the absolute max I think that Corbin Burnes would get on his contract, and say they should have just signed Corbin Burnes. Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes aren't going to amount to the effectiveness of 200 innings of Corbin Burnes next year. You might be right in that thinking. But I think the Mets view the possibility of it really working out, and they get 180 innings out of Frankie Montas and 150 out of Clay Holmes, and now you got 330 innings out of two guys for the same amount that it would have cost for 190 to 200 innings of Corbin Burnes. That's the thought process the Mets are employing. But even with that, I still think they have to figure out another frontline starting pitcher. Because as much as I like the upside of Montas, much as I believe that Holmes can make this transition, as much as everyone who has listened to the show for a while knows I love David Peterson. And I also think that Kodai Senga should be back to himself next year. I'm not just going to write him off because he had one injury-plagued year. With all of that said, you still need to have another frontline guy if you are a team that has World Series aspirations. And I'm okay with that guy being Sean Manaea. I really am. I completely bought into the changes he made last year. So if they end up with the Soto, Alonso, Manaea, Boris trio, or I guess it's a quartet because you already got Frankie Montas in tow, I would be thrilled with the Mets offseason. What's next for this weekend? We're all on Soto watch. If there's not a Juan Soto news bomb or another signing that drops, I probably won't record again until Monday, but I have a sneaking suspicion that I will record an episode maybe even on Saturday, later today, as the Mets might just end up pulling off the biggest signing of the offseason. And if I had to predict when it might happen, I'm supposed to be having a family dinner about 45 minutes from my house, by my parents' house. And that's about when I think it's going to drop, when I'm not able to just run into the studio and record. But if that's the case, I'll have my laptop and a microphone with me. I'll run into my car. I'll record an audio-only show, and I'll get that thing up as soon as possible. So make sure, if you're listening, you're going to follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so you know if I do go live, if I'm home, or if I'm not. You'll know when that episode's going to drop, and we'll be back whenever we get that Soto news, good or bad. As always, thank you for listening. Already said we follow, rate, and review. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league, by Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.